January 1st, there have been 9 drug-related murders in the 19th Police District alone. Citywide, of 135 homicides so far this year, 53 of them are drug-related. That's about 40%.
Since the year 2001, there have been 10,000 shooting victims in Philadelphia. Most of the gunmen under the age of 25.
Jamaican drug dealer is gunned down, a bag of cocaine by his head. Jamaican Posse has been the most organized, the largest, about 1,000 members.
On the night of June 29, 1989, Philadelphia's streets would be shocked by a brazen murder against 2 well-known legends. The men were Anthony Fletcher and Eric Hurst, members of Philadelphia's organized Junior Black Mafia, coke kingpins who ran the city's streets day in and day out. Fletcher started his life as a lightweight boxing champion, but after a series of losses had been financially struggling and turned to drug dealing to compensate for his income. But the two were about to receive a rude awakening that night as they sat together in a BMW with the license plate Wild Thing adorning the front. Watching some people play basketball at a park in front of them, 2 dealers armed with weapons crept up to the car and within seconds began to open fire, pumping their guns into the vehicle and hitting both men. Hurst took 4 bullets and died almost instantly, while Fletcher clung on to life and was taken to a nearby hospital. This was only one of the many incidents involving the Junior Black Mafia, an organization that was known for its saying, "Get down or lay down," and they went through on that promise quite often, not only against rivals outside of the organization, but they were more than willing to take out members inside their own homes if it meant maintaining and securing control over the streets of Philadelphia's criminal underworld. This is the story of the Junior Black Mafia, one of the most notorious American gangs whose impact can still be seen in Philadelphia until today. The Junior Black Mafia didn't just sprout up out of nowhere. In fact, their origins can be traced back to the original Black Mafia that had existed in the city of Philadelphia since the 1970s. The Black Mafia was a dangerous organization involved in a number of illegal activities like high-level narcotics trafficking, extortion, and murder. They held significant control in the political world, allowing them to operate basically free for many years. However, as is the story with many criminal organizations and gangs, the Black Mafia was hit by a wave of arrests and hits, leading to most of the organization's membership being dead or behind bars. Despite this though, the existence of the Black Mafia was enough to inspire many on the streets of Philadelphia to follow a similar path. The younger generation in Philadelphia was no stranger to crime and the dark world of drugs. They sought any opportunity to make money and to hold a similar legacy to the original Black Mafia. This was the reason that the stage was set for the JBM to rise. Aaron Jones, or AJ, was born in the 1960s in Philadelphia. As a young boy, Jones was an errand boy for the Black Mafia chief Robert Mims. His main tasks were doing simple and basic things like running quick errands, shining shoes, and other small jobs. However, he grew up around the members of the Black Mafia and saw the way they operated, enamored by their high-stakes, wealthy lifestyle. He also witnessed how they utilized violence and murder to keep others in check, and this would later play a major role in AJ's life. In 1985, AJ would begin to establish what would become known as the Junior Black Mafia. During the 1980s, Philadelphia was marked by a skyrocketing, highly profitable trade of drugs. Of those drugs, cocaine was the popular choice to sling on the streets. Cocaine is one of the most highly addictive drugs out there and comes from the coca plant. For the most part, cocaine in the US is kicked up by organized crime groups in Southern America and Mexico. It's then brought to the US and Canada and sold illegally on the streets by gangs, cartel offshoots, and more. Cocaine's demand was high in the Philadelphia area, and Jones's people recognized this immediately. Determined that they wanted a slice of the money-making pie, they established a reliable supply chain from California, which was a popular state to get cocaine from due to its proximity to distribution from Central and Southern American nations. Childhood friends Aaron Jones, Mark Casey, and Leonard Patterson worked together to create JBM and had originally grown up together on the streets of West Philadelphia. They all shared a common vision, one that centered around Jones's fascination with the movie The Godfather. father. The trio, not even in their 30s yet, were already starting off strong. They opted for drug running as extortion was too risky and not profitable enough, while loan sharking was in control of the Italian mafia and didn't have much sway in their own community. Coke was fast, easy, and popular. Aaron Jones was able to establish his connection to California suppliers through his lieutenant, JBM member James Cole. Cole had returned to Philadelphia after being run out by a rival years earlier, and while on the run, established ties to other gangs in California and Florida. By 1985, the JBM leaders had gotten their start, dealing coke on the streets of Germantown, but they had a vision they were going to put into action. They planned on using the fast drug money to get off the streets and into real, legitimate work. But over time, that vision faded. Guns popped off in South Philly streets almost immediately. The JBM's access to coke routes gave them an immediate edge by their conception, and they began their own mini distribution network. Having a steady supply, they would take that supply and provide it to other local dealers. They ensured that these local dealers only sold JBM coke through a gun to their heads. The idea of controlling the local drug slingers didn't just provide them with control, however, it also provided them with the ability to basically profit from nearly every time a drug was sold in their area. As the slogan went, "Get down or lay down," essentially warning their rivals to either step out of the way or get in line. Otherwise, they were at a constant risk. Jones and his friends began recruiting more and more men, growing their close circle of JBM founders. Aside from Jones, Cole, Casey, and Patterson, there was also Cole's brother Hayward, Benjamin Goff, Tracy Mason, and Rick Jones, a heroin dealer from Mount Airy and one of the gang's richest and low-profile founders. Then there was Christopher Laster, aka Dirty Black, and Brian Thornton, aka Mooch. There was also Leroy Davis, known as Bucky. Born in Philadelphia in the 60s during the height of the Black Liberation Movement, he grew up in a Christian household and began boxing in 1974 when he joined the Southwest Youth Center. However, despite his success in boxing, he, like many other young men in Philadelphia, was drawn to the allure of street life in the area. Without much money to his name, by the mid-1980s, Davis began associating with JBM. Davis would become fully involved with the JBM after an incident in which a JBM member named Black Sam, also known by the other nickname Magic, saved the boxer's life during a dice game gone wrong. By 1986, Davis had been fully integrated into JBM, managing drug distribution and operations all across the city. His crew was efficient, and they were able to dominate almost immediately. He went from a boxer low on cash to a man leading a luxurious lifestyle, wearing high-end clothes, driving European cars, and being influential in his community and the streets. 1987 would be a foundational year for the JBM. They formed a commission in their early days, the gang's 8 founders. This commission was supposed to include members that shared equal power and could make decisions, but by 1987, Aaron Jones had adopted the position of a sort of chairman of the board. The gang was growing at lightning speed due to their bursts of violence. By 87, they held interests in almost 30 local businesses they used for laundering cash, and thousands of low-level dealers and crack cooks at the bottom of the pyramid. For a fee of just one G-note and a cut of their profits, dealers could join the JBM, sell drugs in their neighborhood, and have access to coke and lawyers whenever they needed to. At the peak of their power, the top-level members were making millions of dollars per month. In 1987, Philly Police Sergeant Steve Arch began noticing a strange trend. He'd been out one night when he saw a group of men from Germantown heading out in Saabs, Volvos, and BMWs, all heading for A-Tech. A-Tech was an auto dealer on Wayne Avenue in Germantown, owned by Benjamin Goff, and they were there for a commission meeting. The men were all young, unknown to police, and all had rings that spelled out JBM. An officer asked Patterson what JBM stood for, and he told them it meant just burn money, while other names arose over time like just blowing money or just better men. By 1988, police became much more aware and familiar with this new rising group known as JBM. Reports showed that the JBM wasn't just dealing coke and crack rocks, it was also dealing in contract killings for fees ranging from $2,500 to $5,000. The men stood head to toe in designer, frequently dined out at fine restaurants and trendy clubs, and more importantly, didn't care who saw them. They weren't camera shy because they knew that at the end of the day, no civilian or gangster would ever testify against them. By then, they had a major coke network stretching up from Colombia and had operations across the entire city. They had 45 branch drug operations as a result of their diversification, pawning off 100 to 200 kilos of coke a week across the board and bringing in at least 2.5 mil a week. In modern USD, that's almost $6.5 million every single week. However, that fast money meant quick-to-action violence. On April 17, 1987, University City drug dealer Richard Gambrell was gunned down in his Mercedes, and Michael Black, a JBM associate, was charged for the hit. A year later, April 16 of 1988, Patterson was involved in shooting down James Wesley Tate, a drug dealer, at 34th and Wallace. Tate died in the hospital 2 days later, and Patterson eventually received life in prison. On May 19, 1988, police showed up at a fortified home on Cuyahoga Street around 2 a.m. They entered the home to find 4 people: local boxer Gregory Tutt, nicknamed King Tutt, his girlfriend Dawn Gross, and 2 of his cousins, lying on the floor, shot dead. JBM members Timothy and Laverne Dockery were arrested for the quadruple homicide. There that day to collect the drug debt when things went wrong. On July 12, 25-year-old Mark Lisby was walking back to his Strawberry Mansion home that night when he was gunned down by 21-year-old Anthony Reed, a JBM member who he owed drug money. Reed was arrested following the murder, but he got off on bail. On October 11, 21-year-old JBM dealer Morris Parrish was arrested for the rape murder of his neighbor, a nurse named Marva Thompson. He owed the JBM 3 Gs for drugs they'd supplied him and broke into her house that night to rob her and get the money when things went bad.
Society has been the victim of all of this. Those that have been weak in mind to use drugs.
Nicky Scarfo is now in custody on other charges. The federal government hopes today's case will put him away forever.
By 1989, newspapers in Philadelphia would publish a report of the Italian Mafia allegedly buying cocaine from the JBM. It seemed that members of the Mafia would get their drugs from the Junior Black Mafia, which was a break-in tradition. The South Philadelphia-based Italian Mafia pretty much controlled the criminal racketeering operations in the city. But in 1987, Mafia boss Nicodemo Scarfo was arrested and was potentially facing life behind bars for his Mafia work. This created a massive rift in his hold over the area. Many survivors of the mob wars in South Philadelphia and members of the JBM had business dealings and personal relationships, and after Scarfo's arrest, they only became closer. One prominent member of the Mafia who had close ties to JBM was Joe Merlino. The son of mobster Salvatore Merlino, he associated with JBM members to distribute cocaine in the area. Furthermore, many founders of the JBM like Benjamin Goff and Tracy Mason served as intermediaries between their organization and the mob. The Italian Mafia initially allowed the Black Mafia in the 70s and the 80s to produce and sell meth and coke with a street tax as the price, but upon the arrest of Scarfo, the Mafia had no real ability to collect their taxes. This left a major power vacuum in the streets of Philadelphia, and while the JBM was one such group able to step into the vacuum and attempt to seize control, 1989 brought with it much more violence. On January 2nd, 1989, Timothy Keat, known as King Akil, was shot dead during a fight at a bar in Mount Airy, gunned down by Mark Casey, who was arrested on charges of committing the shooting. On February 2nd, 1989, around 2 a.m., Terrence Goss, a member of JBM, was having some drinks at the Airport Hilton on 10th Street, Packer Avenue. He then headed out for his car, a late model Volvo, and he got into it. However, before he could start the car, 2 gunmen, one for each side of the vehicle, sprung suddenly and began to shower the car with a spray of bullets. One of the gunmen had been wielding a submachine gun called an Uzi, a handheld weapon that is known for its lethal speed. The 2 gunmen were able to hit Goss about 14 times and then fled the scene on foot. Goss stepped out of the car and limped through the parking lot, where he eventually collapsed onto a grassy area. However, he managed to survive and was identified by police as being a member of the JBM's branch in Nicetown. Just over a month later, Anthony Reed was back in jail and facing life in prison after he shot and killed a child throwing snowballs at his car in Grays Ferry.
Many as 100 people were crowded inside a Taste of the Islands restaurant, police say, when at least 4 gunmen started firing.
Police are trying to determine if this incident was related to warfare between Jamaican drug gangs known as posses.
Over the next few months of 1989, more killings polluted South Philadelphia as the JBM sought to seize control of the city. 24-year-old Albert Regan was shot dead on March 26 after he split off from the gang to go independent and even put out 2 hit contracts. Dennis Caldwell was gunned down on April 1st as revenge by Regan's people. Then there was Brock White, shot 8 days later in his car while out on the road by Regan's brother Victor. And then there was 29-year-old Colonel Reginald Rittenberg, a JBM lieutenant who was killed by the JBM for skimming off $1,500 from every kilo of coke he sold to raise his profits. On June 2nd, 1989, two famous members of the JBM, Anthony Fletcher and Eric Hurst, were shot at a playground in South Philadelphia. Fletcher was the state lightweight boxing champion, and he and Hurst had been sitting in a BMW outside the park, watching a basketball game near 4th and Federal Streets, when two men walked up to the car and opened fire on the two at point-blank range. Hurst had been known to police as a JBM member, but they didn't know about Fletcher's connection until around the time of the shooting. Fletcher had been moving drug deliveries to drug houses in southwest Philadelphia to make some cash. The two men had been shot at by a man who had a falling out with JBM. He recruited two people, paid them each $500, and the gunmen went to work. By the time police arrived, Hurst had been shot 4 times in the chest and once in the head, dying almost immediately, while Fletcher was still alive and had taken 4 wounds, 1 in the neck and 3 in the chest. Raymond Adams was charged as one of the gunmen in the murder and was placed in the Philadelphia detention center without bail. He was arrested after he threw a 7.65mm weapon into an alley in the 600 block of Catherine Street. The weapon was found, and police were able to link it to Raymond at that point. Another contender for the top spot in Philadelphia came around this time. In August of 1989, Sam Christian, the historic founder of the then defunct Black Mafia, was allegedly trying to take over control of the Junior Black Mafia. He'd been paroled the previous year while serving a life sentence in the 1971 attempted murder of a policeman and got right to work. He'd attempted to position himself as a contender for control of this new organization, but the JBM's younger leadership, despite working for Christian in the past, vehemently refused. They were fine on their own and had enough connections and money to do things without help from the older generation. Christian had apparently tried again by appealing to Hayward and James Cole, older members of the JBM who used to be enforcers in the original Black Mafia. He also tried to appeal to his own son, Suleiman Bey, a former member of the JBM who had dropped out to help his father. Christian was able to meet with members of JBM and was able to broker a drug deal, but it was clear that Aaron Jones was still heavily in charge by then, and Sam Christian didn't get too far. Then, after Christian, came the Shower Posse. This period of violence between the JBM and the Shower Posse would be one of the most intense and infamous moments in the history of Philadelphia's gangland. The Shower Posse had begun in Jamaica and was an organization that had earned a name for brutality, engaging in violent tactics and showering their enemies with bullets, often in broad daylight. They had made a name for themselves in cities like New York, Miami, Washington DC, and more, and were now looking to expand their territory in Philadelphia. However, they were about to come face to face with JBM, which had been committing murders left and right to secure and maintain control of the city for the longest time, and they weren't about to let the Shower Posse intrude on their territory. At some point in 1989, a key member of the JBM, nicknamed Blitz, who was known for his highly meticulous approach to his operations, began to notice that something was off. Many of his most reliable customers were going missing and were vanishing from the scene. Blitz determined that the situation was far too strange to just let slide under the rug, and he began to look for his customers and see what happened to them. In one incident, he found a coke fiend at a local Walgreens and found out that there was a new gang in town threatening JBM's operations. The newcomers, the Jamaican Shower Posse, were offering the same product, but they had a reputation that far exceeded that of the JBM. Seeing this as a potential rising threat, Blitz relayed the information about the Jamaicans to his captain, and he was instructed to handle the situation quickly and immediately. The following day, Blitz confronted the Jamaican who had intruded on his territory and warned him to essentially leave and deal his drugs somewhere far away. The Jamaican, however, had already been prepared for a situation like this, and while Blitz was speaking to him, 3 other Jamaicans were sitting in a car nearby, watching and listening closely to the confrontation. They took note of Blitz's appearance. Later that day, Blitz and other JBM members were sitting outside gambling when suddenly, a dirt bike with 2 Jamaicans on it sped by, the man sitting on the back opening fire with a weapon. 2 JBM members would die, and 3 would be injured in the attack. This was the shot that would mark the beginning of the violent tensions in Philadelphia's gangland. In retaliation, JBM member Jerome Hicks decided to strike back at the Jamaicans for what they'd done. During one of his regular shifts where he patrolled his usual spots, he spotted several Shower Posse members dealing drugs outside of a club. Hicks and Blitz watched the Jamaicans from a distance and waited for the right moment to strike. As they left the area and headed for their cars, Hicks approached them and unleashed a barrage of bullets, killing the Jamaican men instantly. However, the Jamaicans Jamaicans were outgunning JBM, having access to much larger, much more powerful weapons due to their international connections, but JBM couldn't afford to let up their territory. They determined that they'd have to try harder, and they began to seek out similar powerful weapons, and both gangs were in a sort of arms race, gathering up as many guns as they could to fight each other. However, the JBM was entering a period of trials, arrests, and busts that would slowly cripple them, and over time, the Jamaicans would slowly and naturally take over Philadelphia's drug market. The Jamaicans weren't the only threat to the JBM. Craig Haynes was a relatively influential member of the gang, known for making good money and having strategic decision-making in his operations. By the late 80s, he'd established himself as a big player in Philadelphia, handling lucrative drug deals and managing a sprawling network in the city. Mark Casey, however, was leading a faction that rivaled Haynes within the organization, and he wanted to make his dominant position known. A member of Casey's crew managed to seduce Haynes' girlfriend as a metaphorical slap in his face, and obviously this escalated tensions. Haynes had been driving down Broad Street and noticed something odd. A Mercury Cougar vehicle was rapidly approaching him from behind. The men inside the car were members of Aaron Jones's crew, and they immediately began to open fire on Haynes' car. Haynes managed to just narrowly escape with his life, but he felt betrayed by his former allies and co-workers, and he amassed loyalists to his cause, creating an internal war between him and members of the JBM like Jones and Casey. One major event in the fight between Haynes and Jones was a confrontation that took place in Las Vegas. During a fight night event, the two men got into a physical altercation, but no weapons would be involved. Now back in Philadelphia, the Vegas incident was only another drop in the bucket of rage that was filling between the two. Haynes began to organize a series of retaliatory strikes against Jones's associates, with one incident being the killing of a man named Donald Branch. Haynes' men believed that Branch was actually Jones, and they killed him in a case of mistaken identity. This pushed law enforcement to start looking into Aaron Jones and JBM further, with scrutiny now turned on the gangsters. They felt that JBM's constant hits were distracting from the main objective of making money, and with so much infighting at the top, many of the lower level street dealers stopped paying the street tax. The feud between Jones and Haynes would culminate in a shootout outside of City Hall, where Haynes and members of Jones's crew got into a shootout against each other. Something so brazen like this was obviously bound to draw even more intensive law enforcement scrutiny, and Haynes would be arrested and charged in relation to multiple crimes. Junior Black Mafia's fall from power began on September 1st, 1989, when Aaron Jones was arrested and held on a $3 million bail. This was the second time he'd been arrested on conspiracy and assault charges in connection with the shooting of a man named Richard Isaac. Isaac worked as an independent drug dealer on the streets of Philadelphia, had been offered membership in the JBM, but he wanted to stay independent and refused the offer. He was then shot on February 21st, 1989, taking 10 bullets in the arm, hip, chest, and face. The attack left him paralyzed and confined to a wheelchair. He stated that Jones, another associate of JBM named Samuel Brown, and a third unidentified gunman opened fire while he was standing on a street corner in North Philadelphia. Isaac then recalled falling to the ground while the three men continued to shoot him, and he stated that the shooting only stopped when Jones reportedly stated that he had no more bullets. Jones and Brown would be arrested after the shooting almost immediately, but charges against them were dropped after a preliminary hearing in June when Isaac recanted the identification of Jones and Brown as the gunmen. However, the DA's office would later reveal that Isaac had been intimidated with threats from the JBM, and that they silenced him, with Isaac saying he'd feared that they'd go gunning for his family next if he testified. Then, in October, Casey would pass away in his cell at Holmesburg after drinking a bad batch of lean. D-Block was on lockdown after an inmate stabbed another one, so Casey and his cellmate Patterson were sitting on their bunks getting high, along with inmates in neighboring cells. Casey mixed together coke-laced cough syrup with a suppressant named glutathione, which he mixed with codeine, and a CO discovered Casey lying face up in his bed, crocodile shoes on, dead at around 4 p.m. Things got even worse for the JBM after that. Evidence of the gang's presence was found as far as South Carolina, with schools in the Sumter area dealing with an influx of students grouping into street gangs, and murders were also going up in the area. They were growing across the country, and by 1990, the government had their sights on the gang. For several months throughout the year, federal, state, and local investigators had honed in closely on the JBM and their operations in Philadelphia, alongside their ties to other cities. Over 8 months, officers in Philadelphia were able to find $200,000 in cash, jewelry, and cars, and they were also able to uncover a massive money laundering scheme that led to the arrest of 3 luxury car salesmen from local dealers in the area. Then, Kevin Allen, Kermit Barnhart, Victor Campbell, Jerry Langford, and Marvin Porter, all members of the JBM, were arrested on drug-related charges. They were responsible for the movement of crack cocaine into Wilmington, Pennsylvania, and Newcastle County, Delaware, and their arrests cut off some new drug markets. Then, in May of 1990, as things escalated against them, the gang was shook by an episode of internal warfare. By that point, Bucky Davis was named as the day-to-day street boss of the JBM in Jones' place, while Mooch Thornton served as the gang's acting leader. On May 14, Davis, then just 22, was gunned down by Mooch outside a row house in West Philly, shot and left for dead by his own fellow gangster. Retaliation was planned, but on August 17, Mooch was arrested for a June 10 road rage murder. Mooch and his driver, Little Hawk Watkins, were stuck in traffic when a man named Gregory Jackson honked his horn at them. Watkins got out and pistol whipped the civilian before Mooch ordered him to shoot and kill him. Jackson was gunned down in the middle of the street in front of his wife. With Mooch in jail, Jones decided to hit his cousin, Bruce Kennedy. He gave the hit job to JBM foot soldier James Anderson, a chance to rise up in the gang, who was sent out with another gunman to kill Kennedy. Kennedy was out of jail, acquitted less than 3 years earlier of a murder charge. The hitmen drove up to Mommy's Food Market, Kennedy's West Philly base of operations, and stormed the store at around 4:20 p.m. Using a Mac 11, Anderson shot Kennedy 10 times and wounded the market's civilian co-owner. Kennedy was dead. JBM Captain Rodney Carson picked the hitmen up and helped them hide out at the Airport Tower Hilton. As further investigation into Davis's slaying, on December 8, Jones and Carson, now in prison as well, tortured, burned, and beat another inmate named Hugh Moore as he was connected to the murder. In February of 1991, Carson received between 37 to 75 years and was on trial for further drug-related charges, leading him to flipping against Jones and the JBM. On Valentine's Day of that year, Jones stabbed another inmate and got 10 to 20 years on top of the charges he was already facing. And back on the streets, things weren't looking much better.
We have a growing number of teens that are simply out of control. We don't have a handle on them.
In Philadelphia alone, the crime statistics among juveniles paint a chilling picture. Assaults up 4%, rape up 8%, homicides up a whopping 240% in just 1 year. And he confesses that even he is shocked by the senseless destruction called wilding. Hartley Swan says it's the ocean of drugs that teenagers are drowning in.
In October of 1991, Jones and 25 other members of JBM were indicted in a federal drug conspiracy, and one of the men that played a key role in the indictment was Jesse Coleman, Aaron Jones' brother-in-law, and an FBI agent. Coleman worked to coordinate the probe of the drug gang with State Trooper Tom Ansell and a detective of the Philadelphia Police Department named Lamont Wesson. Jones, already behind bars, was now facing 6 consecutive life sentences and millions in fines and forfeitures if convicted. Authorities named Jones as the former street boss of JBM, and that he killed anyone who refused to purchase his gang's products or would kill people who didn't show him respect. Police had been unable to find 6 of the indicted men during raids in the city, and other JBM associates were still running free on the streets, able to do their work and sell drugs. Many in the area knew that there were members in JBM that were able to take the place of arrested individuals, and that at the end of the day, someone would be able to replace them. By that point, JBM had been responsible for at least 25 murders and had been distributing more than 100 $100 million worth of coke over the past 5 years. In July of 1992, 7 men in the JBM were convicted. Just a few months prior, 3 had been arrested as well, including 2 alleged bosses, while 8 additional co-defendants were waiting trial, and 3 others were considered fugitives of the law. One of the JBM's top squad leaders, Reginald Reeves, was convicted that July alongside numerous members of his crew. Meanwhile, Leroy Jackson, a top advisor to the JBM, was behind bars as well. Law enforcement authorities believe that their work and arrests were beginning to dismantle the coke ring that existed in Philadelphia, with help from the state police, FBI, and the DEA. Numerous members of the gang faced mandatory life sentences behind bars, while others faced by the minimum 10 years for slinging coke. The investigators had used over 60 tape recordings of the defendants, conducted searches of places they met up in as well as their vehicles, and used the testimony of informants in order to gather evidence and conduct their arrests. In September of 1992, after years of trial, Aaron Jones was sentenced to life in prison on charges of conspiring to distribute $100 million of cocaine in Philadelphia between 1986 and 1981. In just a short matter of time, the JBM had viciously fallen apart. Before 1990 had even come around, police declared the JBM all but dead, while the Jamaicans began to swallow up the drug market in their place, signifying JBM's end. In January of 1993, Fletcher received a death sentence for his role in the death of Vaughn Christopher, who owed him a drug debt back in late 1992. Their confrontation had started off tense, leading to a vicious argument and fight in which Vaughn pulled a gun. The two struggled over the weapon, leading to Fletcher shooting Vaughn twice in self-defense, a story that was verified by the assistant medical examiner on the case. However, 3 witnesses brought forth said they saw Fletcher coldly shoot Vaughn to death. Officers investigating the case also lost Vaughn's bullet-damaged clothing that would have shown where he'd been shot that night. Homicide prosecutor Mark Costanzo got his own doctors as well, who agreed with the witnesses, and the jury sentenced Fletcher to the death penalty. Of the witnesses, 2 later recanted their statements, and the 3rd one was discovered to be a fugitive already on the run from 6 warrants. For the next almost 3 decades, Fletcher struggled to get his case overturned, but in January of 2021, he finally was freed. All charges against him dropped. Numerous members of the once infamous JBM gang are still sitting on death row, men like Ralph Birdsong and Anthony Reed, while the gang's top founder and biggest member, Aaron Jones, is still serving a life sentence.
And ditches, cause I'm deep in this premeditated murder mission in the midst of nightfall, covered up like an eclipse, but off the wall, devious.